Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this edition of City Beat. Joining me this week is Kathy Lincoln from the Cherriots Board. So welcome to the show, Kathy.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So I'm somewhat new to Salem. I've been here almost 10 years, but still I don't know much about the history of how Cherriots got started. And so I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of background information about how that happened.
Sure. Cherriots started originally as a part of the city government. City ran the transit district. And at some point, and I'm not sure of the dates, but at some point they decided they didn't want to be a transit district, managing a transit district, so they spun it off with the help of the state legislature. The legislators drafted a bill that actually was specifically aimed at Salem's transit district and authorized it to raise money for raise taxes through property taxes and some other fundraising authority, and establish the boundaries as the urban growth boundary of Salem, which now includes Kaiser. So Salem Kaiser Transit District's authority is within the Salem UGB, and we have most of our income comes from locally is from property taxes, and then we also have federal and state grants and then fares, of course. But the City of Salem apparently did not want to manage the transit district, unlike most places in the country, because most transit districts are run by the municipalities. And they also made sure that Salem's district, unlike TriMet or Lane County Transit, cannot levy an employee payroll tax. Well, TriMet and Lane County both have that authority, and that's where they get most of their money. And their transit system, of course, is a lot more robust and successful than Salem's is, because we've kind of been hamstrung by our ability to raise money. And of course, any money that we raise allows us to get more in federal grants too, because a lot of that requires matching funds.
And Eugene's roughly about the same size as Salem.
Right.
And dealing with kind of the same type mix of population, except for the fact that we have the capital where a lot of people congregate for work.
Yeah. With
city and county and state offices.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. We do have a lot of state property, but the state makes a payment in lieu of taxes. Because they're not paying property taxes, they do make a payment in lieu of taxes, which contributes quite a bit to our budget.
Now, do they give their employees like bus passes, or do they have some sort of agreement with Cherriots to
Well,
do
that's been
like
off
that?
and on, and just recently we're working with the state Department of Administrative Services, came up with a state bus pass program. So each department, I think, each department in the state, if they want to work with this, they can offer their employees free passes on all the buses in town. And that's been real popular too. And the ridership, I think that started in March maybe. No, it's been longer than that. But it's gone, last fall I think, but it's gone up every month. The ridership has gone up. So they had that program in effect when I was a state employee, and I just loved it, because parking is sometimes expensive, private parking downtown.
Yeah, well, also sometimes it can be hard to find parking places at certain times when the legislature's in session.
Yes, especially then, yeah. And it satisfies some of the goals of the state to reduce congestion and greenhouse gas emissions. The sustainability part of it is important for the state. So so that's been a real boon, I think, to the city to have that state employee bus pass program.
So one of the things that came out in one of the recent city council meetings is that the mayor wants to have a committee formed, and I believe Chris Hoy, who's relatively new to as a city councilor, would be in that group about trying to do something about transportation for Salem. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's going on there. I know that Chris, when I interviewed him, said that a lot of people in his district really wanted better bus service.
Right.
They wanted more of them and better shelters, I guess.
Oh boy, we hear about that from everyone, not just his district. But yes, the city's making effort, I think, to work more with the transit district. In the past, I don't know if you know, the city hasn't been real supportive of public transit here, and they've, in fact, when we went out for a bond measure to raise some money for Saturday and Sunday service in 2015, there were some city councilors who actively opposed it, and we got
Contributed money.
Contributed money to the anti-campaign, that's right, and certainly weren't cheerleaders for it at all. So it's really refreshing to have, I think, the new city councilors, and also there's been a lot of public support and encouragement to be more active, and for the city to be more active with the transit district and to improve public transportation. So I think because of that, the city's recently, well, they're working on a long-term strategic plan, and one of their objectives is to, see, I've got it right here, is for a public transportation system that meets community needs. And I think as a result of that, they formed a task force or a workforce that includes the mayor, Chuck Bennett, and Chris Hoy, and Councilor Kara Kaiser, and Councilor Jim Lewis. And then also, I think they have 4 public members. But what's interesting to me is they didn't include anyone from the transit district. So that is kind of puzzling. I have heard, you mentioned that they might.
Well, I heard Chuck say that he was going to have somebody that was a bus driver that the union had kind of put forward.
Yeah.
And he was also asking for other members of the public to sign the application form, and he was looking for people that maybe had lived in other cities with, other transit options and like that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. It did seem like he wasn't including somebody from the transit board, which I thought was kind of odd because we're all in this together, I would imagine,
right.
Trying to fix transportation.
Right. Well, interestingly enough, the transit board had a retreat a few months ago, and to redo our long-term plan, and one of our objectives was also to improve relationships and coordination and cooperation with the city, because it's absolutely critical that we work together on public transit. I mean, the transit district operates the buses and builds and maintains the bus shelters, but of course the city owns and operates the right-of-way, but it does the land use planning and zoning, and regulates parking downtown. So there are a lot of ways that the city could help the transit district be more successful if we could get together and talk about it.
Well, and that kind of gets back to the history, is that City Council at some point, I guess about 20 years or so ago, decided they didn't want to be involved. But as the city has grown, there's more need for it. And I think that sometimes people forget the fact that if we had a very good transportation system, more people are in the transportation, public transit, as opposed to their cars, which means less traffic.
That's right.
And you're better off, even if you have a job where you do have to drive, if there's fewer cars out there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Having better public transit decreases congestion and decreases greenhouse gas emissions, decreases the need for new highways and bridges. And it also, there's a whole population out there that really can't afford 2 cars or maybe even 1 car, or who can't drive. Seniors, students, the service workers who have to work in the restaurants and hotels and nursing homes on weekends and late in the evening. Students who want to take classes at Chemeketa on weekends or late evenings. And if they can't take a bus, they have to buy an old junker car, or maybe someone has to drive them there and back. And
so now there's 2 round trips instead of 1.
So now it's 2 round trips, right. And the cost of maintaining a car, buying gas, parking, insurance, that takes up a big chunk of someone's budget. So a better transit system is better access to jobs, better traffic management. It makes it more attractive to young people who don't want to drive as much as maybe I did when I was growing up. People went down, we drove up and down the gut. No one does. The kids don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, what I see too is a lot of kids, they want to live in the central part of the city, and get away from having a car, because it is a huge expense, especially where we've kind of, if you've gone to college, you've probably come out of there with a fair amount of debt.
Right.
So buying a car is kind of a big deal.
That's
if
right.
you've got $25,000, which is the average, or it was a few years ago, for a 4-year degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's also economical from their point of view to try to cut down on those transportation costs, live closer to maybe where their jobs are.
That's right.
But they still need occasionally transportation places. You can't just walk to, everywhere for the most part.
Yeah.
But, that's also has to do with how cities quite often develop and spread out, which makes their transportation problems even more severe.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the ways I think coordination between the city and the transit district would help considerably. I mean, there are a number of things that that we could work on. One of them is code changes, like requiring developers who are building big housing subdivisions or housing developments, require the developers to put in a bus stop or even a bus shelter. Right now, we can suggest that, and we do, but there's no requirement that they do that. So a lot of times those don't get built. Or if the city's making decisions about land use or road maintenance, for example, I can't think of the street, but it's between Mission Mill and the Amtrak station right at 12th Street where the railroad track crosses
Mill
there.
Street?
Yeah, maybe it is Mill Street, yeah. Well, a few years ago when the city repaved that street, they increased the slope up to the railroad tracks, so now a bus can't get over that railroad tracks. So that puts that street off limits. I mean, that's just one example, but if they'd thought a little bit more about it, well, maybe we want to make this accessible to buses also. The city doesn't, or the transit district doesn't have any input into things like that right now. Or parking downtown. Right now, Salem has, I was talking about the cost of parking. I didn't have access to free parking, but I know the school district downtown does, the forestry department, ODOT, the hospital they all have lots and lots of free parking, which means encourages people to drive their cars. And the bus system could adequately serve, especially right down State Street and right down Mission Street. Those are main bus routes that could serve the hospital and a lot of other downtown employees. Mill Creek is pretty much is served by the bus, but the Fairview Industrial Park. But there's acres and acres of parking out there too. And rather than require that much parking, maybe instead require bus stops and have a few more frequent bus service to those areas would reduce congestion and greenhouse gas emissions and improve the transit system.
Well, I was thinking of another thing that maybe the city could help with, and that's they're in charge of stoplights. Mm-hmm. They could be given priority to buses at stoplights where they can get through and be kind of ahead of the traffic.
Right, so they're not stuck in the traffic.
And that would help people get to their destination quicker because they're not in line with everybody else.
Right.
And I think that would be an incentive for people to say, oh, wow, the buses get to go. Maybe I should be riding the bus because I'll get there quicker instead of sitting in my car in traffic. Mm-hmm. Especially if you're going down Commercial Street or a street like that, or Lancaster, I would imagine would be the same way.
Right. Yeah, Center Street. Yeah, Commercial Street now coming into town or going out in the evening is one of the worst in town, I think. But the bus or the traffic light thing is a good point. In it was 2010, the city and ODOT and the transit district had an alternative mode study done about what could be done to improve. This was particularly related to getting across the bridges downtown, but what could be done to reduce that congestion other than building a new structure. And the section on transit emphasized it's called the Q jump lane or something like that, so that the buses get priority at the lights.
And during rush hour, maybe they could have a special lane for the buses, so that they would have priority.
Right.
And because the more people you take and put on buses, the fewer cars you will have out there. And I know that when that levy came up, there were a lot of people complaining about, how the buses are only like 30 or 40 or 50% full. But if you go over there and look at those bridges, most of the time you're talking about maybe 20 or 25% of, capacity, because you maybe just have the driver in the car.
Right.
Or
right.
a big truck or something,
Right.
and that is really a big waste of space.
Yeah. Well, and if you consider, of course, if you see the bus at the beginning of its route, it's only got, the bus driver or one or two. But I ride the bus a lot, and I'll get on, maybe there's 10, 12 people, 3 get off and 2 get on, and then, 1 gets off and 2 get on. But over the course of the ride, you've served 20 people. And look at the space that 20 cars take up, both to drive and to park, and that's a big service. And people say, well, why don't they use smaller buses for when you don't have as large, as many riders? But most of the cost of the bus is the bus driver, and it doesn't make sense to have a fleet of smaller buses for part of the day and a fleet of bigger buses for the rest of the day. So it's like, the analogy is if you have a restaurant and you've got 30 tables in there, some of the time only 2 or 3 of them will be occupied, but at dinner time you want to have enough tables for everyone.
You want to make sure you have enough of that.
Right, right.
Okay. So, and that is an issue I hear from folks sometimes. Well, there's nobody on the buses.
Well, there are people on the buses.
Yeah.
They get on them, they could see that.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's also, I hate to say this, but there's kind of a class kind of thing that goes on with that, because I know that when I used to have to commute, and I'd commute by bus, people, and it was funny too, because it would be, well, why don't you take the train? I said, because I can take the bus directly to where I'm going. The train doesn't actually go, to exactly where I'm going. It goes here, but that's still a long way from where I'm wanting to go.
Yeah.
And so, so public transportation is kind of looked down upon, but the thing is that financially, it makes more sense to take a bus or a train, whatever, as opposed to taking a private car, because you got to pay for your insurance and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting, because I remember seeing a study, and this was years ago, that if you calculate the time that it takes you to buy the car and maintain the car, you're probably only going about 6 to 7 miles per hour. When you count the hours it takes you to...
That's interesting.
Yes. Well, most people can walk 3 to 3.5 miles an hour. So you're not doing a whole lot there. And if you bike, you can usually average about 10 to 12.
That. Yeah, you beat that.
And I loved biking when I was younger, and I always realized that I could buy a brand new bike for whatever it usually cost me to fix whatever was wrong on my car. I just go out and buy a new bike. And I think that's something that people don't look at. They think that they have to have a car, and like people in my generation, you can't wait to be, of age so you can drive.
Yeah.
But we've got to get over that. That was at a time when we had lots of energy available, lots of cheap energy available. Mm-hmm. We had the resources, but we're starting to find our limits now. Mm-hmm. And we need to maybe adjust how we look at doing things. And basically what we're talking about when we talk about public transportation is getting from point A to point B.
Yeah, for the most part we are. And I've heard the figure that you can save $10,000 a year by using public transportation over your private vehicle. And that isn't even counting the time factor that you talked about.
Right. And well, I had a friend that she sold her car and took public transportation to her work for 2 years and was able to take a year off and live in Paris.
Wow.
From the money she saved.
No kidding.
Yes.
Well, that's an incentive, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people just think, I have to have a car to get around. But do you really? I mean, there's other ways of getting around, and you really need to look at where you work, where you live. Because if you're commuting a long distance, you're probably going to need a car. Or if you live out in a rural area, you're probably going to need a vehicle. But do you really? I mean, think about where you live and where you work and try to match that up. And you could probably save yourself a lot of money doing that.
Well, I understand people want a car if they're going to go on trips, or if they have a family, like you take your kids to, or took your kids to the babysitter on your bike, but a lot of people don't feel comfortable doing that. And I can understand if there's an emergency, what do I do? But there are other options. There are the zip cars. And I think in bigger cities like Portland and Seattle, it's much more acceptable to get around without, and possible to get around without a car. In a rural areas, you almost have to if you're going to go to the grocery store. And I think Salem's kind of right in the middle there. I think we're just kind of transitioning from a lot of open space and cheap land to a more dense urban area, and we need to recognize that and accommodate, make sure we have the facilities that people need to get around without a car.
So what would you like to see from the City of Salem come out of this committee or work group that they're forming?
Well, I'm really pleased that they're focusing on public transportation, but I think I'd like to see them reach out a little bit more to the transit district and to the board. I know when our president Bob Krebs went to the city council meeting right after the new councilors and the mayor were sworn in, and congratulated them and said, we're ready to work with you, we're anxious to get started and see what we can do together to improve transportation. And we haven't heard from them since then. And I'm happy that they're working with this task, they've come up with the task force, but I think there's a lot of coordination and hard work that we can do together to improve transit for the whole city.
Well, what would be some examples of things that you would like to tell them then?
Well, like I mentioned, the code changes that would require transit facilities when property is being developed. Another code change would be, I think right now the sign ordinance doesn't allow us to put advertising on the bus shelters, which if we could sell advertising for the bus shelters, we have more money to maintain them. Things like when you're maintaining the streets or making construction decisions, decide or discuss how that's going to impact the bus service. Right now, like for example, they're narrowing. A plan is to narrow Broadway from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, with bike lanes. But that means right now the bus can pull over on 1 lane because it goes up and down Broadway all the time. And I don't know that there's any provision being made for pullouts, because once we've got 2 lanes, then
now
the
you've
bus
stopped all
stops.
the traffic.
Right. Yeah. So that's an issue. And just being supportive. Support the transit district's effort to raise funds, like if we need to, property taxes or an employee tax if the current transportation bill doesn't pass, which I sure hope it does. We'd love to see the city be at the legislature now, tonight or whenever, lobbying, supporting the new transportation bill, which has money that would be sufficient to provide Saturday and Sunday service here. So we'd like to see their efforts supporting publicly transit efforts to improve transit. And then of course the parking issue. If you could do a lot by reducing the number of parking spaces that people are required to provide in commercial buildings especially, and that would increase our ridership, I think.
Well, especially, it's kind of interesting too, because I was reading the paper this morning about how our mall's going to be dying.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are buying things online.
Right.
And now we've got these huge malls with huge parking areas, and pretty soon, if they start dying, you've just got empty space out there that's accomplishing nothing.
Yeah.
And it's set so far back from sidewalks and like that it's not inviting to people walking.
Right. Yeah, I know that I live out north of town, and the Fred Meyer's north of town has an enormous parking lot, and it's never full. But I expect that it was required to provide that many spaces. And I mean, all the other uses you could put that to other than empty asphalt.
Well, and that's part of the thing too about a third bridge or widening out or creating new freeways when we can't even maintain the ones we have.
Exactly.
And we're using up a lot of space. And it was interesting, I went to Ireland about 15 years ago now, And for one thing, they don't have those big clover leaves. They just have roundabouts out on the major highways and like that, which take up so much less space. And the roads, for the most part, were 2 lanes and occasionally 4 and like that. But they didn't have acres of land being taken up by clover leaves.
Of course, they're probably not driving 70 miles an hour either.
Well, it's not very far from one place to another.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a particular, and a lot of people walked.
Yeah.
And I mean, I always considered myself a fast walker, and I was being left behind by old people, kids, and everybody when I was there. And it was kind of amazing because there were some cars, but it was nothing like here, and most everybody walked.
Yeah, they probably don't have the obesity problems either.
No, I didn't see any. I was probably among the quick qualify on that score. But, and I can remember when I was young, my parents didn't have a car, and we walked everywhere. It was healthy for you. I mean, that's a good pace for folks.
It is. That's what I like to be outside all the time, walking, biking.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you want to learn more about, if you're talking about people not being comfortable on the buses, we have, come on down sometime, try the buses out. We've got very friendly customer representatives, service representatives in the transit mall. We have a training program you can take, how to use the fare boxes, how to put your bike on the bus, where the routes go. Check out the website. We've got lots of information there, including a trip planner. Put in where you are and where you want to go, and it'll tell you how long it'll take you and how to get there on the bus. So.
And occasionally, I've gotten tickets, or you can get tickets for like a free day pass just to try it out.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'd like to maybe encourage that because it isn't as scary as some people
once you
think
get people used to it, then it's a lot
Right.
better for them and like that.
Right.
So, Kathy, are there any other things you'd like to bring up at this point?
Well, I guess I would just like to mention the transportation bill that I said they're having hearings on. I had one last night and tonight, and then tomorrow I think there's just not a public input, but a discussion among the committee members. But it would provide, among other things, for transportation. It would provide, it provides for a 0.1% payroll tax on employee payroll tax, which is a pretty small amount. It would amount to about 39 cents for a minimum wage worker who's working 40 hours a week, 39 cents a week. So it's not very much. It would provide money for transit throughout the state. Rural areas especially have called for better transit because there's just no options, in Pendleton or Medford, John Day.
Baker City,
yeah. And it would be transformational for the Cherriots. It would give us enough money for Saturday and Sunday service, later evening service, maybe even Saturday service for our regional carts, yeah. It goes out to Staten, Woodburn, and Silverton, Mount Angel. And maybe even free student bus passes that students could ride for free. So I'd just like all of your listeners to contact their legislators and to support the transportation bill. It'd make a huge difference, statewide and locally.
Well, Kathy, I want to thank you for coming in and joining us here on City Beat, and tune in next time.
Thank you.